right, so I would be happy to start and talk a little bit about this article that I also read a long time ago and reread again. And I think what struck me, the very first thing that struck me when I reread this article was one of the very first things he said, and I'll quote it: "Reflection is a uniquely individual and personal process, and therefore is what we call reflective supervision." I just really appreciate the individuality and the personalness of this process, and how, despite how I could define it in academic words, I feel like the experience was so much more powerful than any academic words I could put on it. It shifted me, my experience in reflective supervision. And that particular thing always strikes me as how it's individual to each of us. Do you guys have thoughts about that particular piece? Or was there something in the beginning of this that struck you?
Yeah, I can start. I think for me, right following that statement, just where the reflective supervisor creates that safe, foundational space for you to be able to say all of these things out loud, all of those wonderings or curiosities about the work that you do, whether it is with families or children or coworkers, and what that brings up for you and the way that you can process that in that way. Now that I have reflective supervision, it just all comes together. And you're right, it's really at its core, that's what it is. And what it means. It's individualized and you're talking through your stuff. But it's really a safe way to do that and a healthy way to do that.
Yeah.
When I first started this, I was relatively new to, this was very new to me a couple of years ago when I first started to read it. And I remember thinking, okay, so it is, I really had to, because I think was coming across kind of supervision as, okay, this is the framework. These are the boxes we're going to check every time we meet, and for everybody. And it was this weird mixture of hard, and I don't think it was really hard. I think it was scary to change, but it was also easy once it started. Not to say that I don't have to keep working on it, but I had it in my head. It was harder. It was hard and easy all at the same time. But I think like I said, the hardness was thinking that I had to change or do something and not just let it be and trust, I guess, the process.
Yeah, I hear that. I love how you talked about letting it be and do the doing. That seems to be a thing that whenever I read an article about reflective supervision, I can't help but take away. And infant mental health is like, how you be is so much more important than anything you do. Even if there are boxes to check, and even if there are deadlines, that you can do those things in a way of being. And it feels so important. And what you said, Sam, about the relationship, that is everything to me. That sense of safety, that there's not going to be retribution somehow, or there's not going to be judgment somehow, or like you should be further along on your path or something. Yeah, and he talks about that in this article. He talks about how it's not only personal, but how it's at the receiver's pace. It's the job of the reflective supervisor to allow the space and time needed with some gentle pushing for people to be able to get there.
Yeah, I like how he talks about, when you said that, Bonnie, it makes me think of when he talks about in the section, promoting and supporting reflection, how he got to determine his way, the context of the conversation and the focus of each section. and how the supervisor, took very minimal notes, but really allowed him that process and that time to work through those things. And that is different because, like you said, in typical supervision, there is that model where we're going through what you did, what you didn't do, and we're checking these boxes. But this is really allowing the supervisee to take the reins as to how they want that session to be. And I think that is a huge shift, but it's an important one.
Yes. And it's back to that, it's not about what to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's about how to be.
The capacity to, and this is funny because not only did I write it and read and highlight it last time, I highlighted it and I underlined it and read this time on the form. And it was the quote about capacity to appropriately let go of my needs and worries.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just, at the time. And I need to pull this out and review this more because I need to remember that sometimes it is easy to get sucked in and I want everyone to trust the process. So helping people get there too. And knowing that the process isn't always asking a question, getting an answer maybe, or that, but letting it happen and come upon it on their own. So really allowing myself to let go of that.
Mm-hmm. Really hard to do.
Yes.
Yeah. Slowing down to go fast.
Yeah.
Wild. One of the things that he talks about in here, and this is leaning a little bit toward the academic, but I can't help but find it to be like meaningful to me, both when I read it the first time and when I read it now. It's just differently meaningful. Is the 3 different tasks he talks about in reflective supervision, right? And the first one is that emotionally significant events. I never really understood that until I deeply experienced a transformative reflective supervisory relationship. I didn't really get how come it was so important to talk about that stuff. I really didn't. And then after I started to share the things that make me feel big feelings, I see patterns. And that's what really blew me away.
I was going to say, for those tasks, I like how they seem to feed into each other. So the whole idea about those emotionally significant events, and how that makes you feel in those relationships, then transcends over to the meaning, like evaluating those meanings of what those feelings are, what those thoughts are, how that impacts how you interact with other people, adults and children. And then how it can lead to that professional growth and development. So just how it all seems connected, but just in such a simple way. Like we don't even think about it. It's like a fleeting thought, but it's really, if we stopped and paid attention and just be, it makes a lot of sense in the work that we do.
Finding that meaning around it, that part, Sam, that part really hit home for me. It's like there's meaning behind how I feel, really. It's not just that I have a bad day or, I'm in a bad mood or my kids were, struggling with this and that, so I'm carrying that into the space today and I'm just distracted. That really fascinated me, that there was more meaning behind that, behind those big feelings, and that there was pattern behind that. Yeah. I guess for me it was the overall increase in self-awareness that truly blew my mind in a meaningful, deep, reflective supervisory relationship. I thought I had a sense of who I was and why I did what I did. I learned a lot more than I thought I would. This is a piece that feels really cool to me. Can I read this to you?
Yeah.
I love quotes and I love to read it like directly from the article. This feels important. there's two parts of this I'm going to read. When a child such as this, and he's talking about the child that really triggered him and how he would like turn away from that child and turn to an easier child, right, for him. He said, when a child such as this, I felt ineffective and incompetent. I told these stories when I could muster the courage. Sometimes I dodged, hedged, glossed over, or deflected, while the reflective supervisor waited patiently for me to settle in. God, I did an awful lot of that. Have you guys found yourself, like, even now we all bought into reflective supervision, right? Do you guys find that you're sometimes kind of pushing against what you know is the right thing to do? Like, I don't want to do this. It's uncomfortable.
So getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that is a hard thing to do because you're being pushed outside your comfort zone. And one of the things that he mentions in his reactions to this particular child, which in reading that situation and scenario, I'm like, I probably would have the same feelings or a similar reaction. But he talks about the ghost from the nursery, but he talks about it in a way, not as a parent, but as a professional, and how his ghost from when he was a child and the things that happened to him, how it feeds into his reactions and relationships with the kids that he works with. And in that moment for me, because I always looked at it through this narrow view of, no, it's from parent to caregiver or from caregiver to child. It's much broader than that. And how it just kind of was like, oof, oh, that those relationships do impact how you feel. And from being a child and how you were parented, how you interact with kids, whether it's through work or when you're out and about, that has a huge impact. And I just never saw it that way. So yeah, I just found, for me, that was like a light bulb moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, even understanding reactions, and I think even understanding even the role as the reflective supervisor of not having to give direction or react. I always felt that I was, when I first read them, I'm like, well, I thought I'm supposed to. But then once I truly understood, and then looking back on what my reactions were, and really understanding that, wow, that came from probably a ghost that I had, not realizing, thinking it was, I don't know, something. So really internalizing that and then reflecting back on, so how much of this was that, of what I was giving and offering.
Oh man, Danielle, that is so cool to have realized. Like, it's like you reflected on old past relationships and saw them differently, maybe after.
Yeah.
And that the difference was in how you were being. Yeah. I discovered that too. And I went back, I got to tell you, Sam, I've talked with you about this before. The guilt I have felt over past supervisory relationships. It's like, oh God, if I had known then what I know now, I would have done it differently. And I feel so bad now. Then, so what do you do with that? Yeah. He didn't say this specifically in this article, but I am so curious what you guys think of this. And we've talked about simple, complex, all of that stuff, but if there's a phrase, let's say, that could summarize my experience with reflective supervision and infant mental health and any sort of counseling work or being with people work, this is really all about just talking about what's real. What's really going on in dynamics, what people are really feeling, how people are really affected by each other. That's really what this is about. And finding a space in that relationship where you can feel safe enough to say the things you really think and feel. And then be willing to unpack that and find important things in there.
It's hard. It's harder to unpack when you're not used to unpacking. I think in other supervisory relationships, you're packing it all in. So you're packing up that box as neatly as you can, and you're putting it in the closet, and then you're moving on to the next box. Where with reflective supervision, it's forcing you to take that box back out, unpack it, look at what's in there, process it, work through it, and you have someone there with you to guide you through that. And I think that's the biggest difference, and it's huge. It's so important to have that experience. And I just wish everyone could have reflective supervision, because it's such a value across all disciplines. And I think you don't know that you're missing it until you've got it. So we need to share that goodness.
He says that, Sam. He says that in here. He didn't know what he didn't know until he had reflective supervision in a childcare setting. Like, what? What is this? He even approached it with some like suspicion, or like, I'll give it a try. All right. What? Which, how cool. I kind of feel like, I mean, I know that my first reflective supervisor knew what she was doing, but I didn't know what she was doing. And like you said, Sam, you sort of trusted the process, right? So I did. I just leaned into it and I trusted it. And it took me to a place that I would not have guessed. I just wouldn't have guessed. He says this here, which it was the only way I think it could have worked for me at the time, truly, because I had a lot of ghosts that I thought I understood. You know, I'd gone through my own therapy in life around my stuff. And reflective supervision uncovered stuff that I didn't know it affected me like that at work. What he says here that aligns with that is, my experience was never judged to be good, bad, right or wrong, appropriate or inappropriate. It simply was. I don't know whether this was valuable for you guys or not, but that was incredibly important to me. That there was no judgment, that there was no like, oh God, you're being inappropriate. You're using supervision the wrong way. You aren't, you know, it was, what's real is what's welcome here. If it's real, it's welcome here.
And that safe space was created for him to be and have that relationship and not feel judged. Because I feel there was so many times in the things that he said where from the outside looking in, you would be like, oh my goodness, why is he talking about this poor kid like that? But giving him the safe space to process that and really talk through his feelings. And then he figured out, like, this is what's going on. Like, okay, the meaning behind my feelings, and what that looks like for me and how it comes across in my interactions with kids. So
yeah. That is how he got from that stage that you were talking about, Danielle, or that task of sort of finding meaning in those emotional experiences and then moving into not being pressured to at all, he says, right? But moving into sort of an awareness that naturally resulted in him thinking maybe if he was different, he could even be more effective. So it wasn't like he had to become a different person, right? He simply noticed things he never noticed the impact of that on himself and the children. And naturally, that sort of lent itself to possible shifting of the way he was being and things he was doing. It's like his reflective supervisor didn't have to tell him he had to change. Didn't push him to.
And you know, it's funny, I'm thinking of the word allowed isn't because the supervisor didn't, I want to say, he did allow him, but not by saying, I'm giving you permission. He did it by being and showing in every way in supervision. And which I think just naturally carries over to other ways, which builds the trust to allow people who have never experienced it before and are really trying to allow people to trust that it is a safe and good way to be, and to trust the process, and it's okay.
Yeah.
We did allow it, I guess, in a way. It's not my permission, but I don't know.
I totally get it. Yeah. I totally get that. And that was my experience with reflective supervision, Danielle, was that very thing, which I was good enough the whole time. I didn't do that.
Like, what do you mean I was good enough?
But you know what I mean, right? I'm like, I'm good enough. And if I take some risks in the relationship and tell you what I really feel and what I really think, and I'm willing to be a little bit reflective of my own self and my own experiences, challenge my own thinking, I can be better at this. What? I mean, it was always my goal in my work to meaningfully support people in ways that felt meaningful to them and valuable to them. And when I found out there was things that I could do to get better at that, I was like, I'm all in. It started to hurt. I don't know if you guys had this experience, but when we really got into that change business and I was really feeling safe enough to consider what I might need to be and do differently. I mean, he said it in here and I'm going to say it again, but maybe you guys didn't experience this, but sometimes during those sessions, I delayed and dodged. I used small talk that rambled on until the end of our session. I tried to forget about the ghosts. I tried telling myself that simply knowing they existed was enough and that they would now just leave me alone. But it's like ongoing. I mean, the pain is real. I think when I came up on that pain, it was like, ooh, I didn't expect to feel so much in here. And that maybe was the ultimate surprise of all about reflective supervision to me, despite the fact that it was safe and it was never comfortable, but it was always safe. It was always challenging. There was moments where I had to face pain to be able to get past it. And that I didn't expect. But it made all the difference.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also making that shift from what we do every day, we come to work because we want to take that pain from people. So you don't see, I don't know, it was very eye-opening to me when I started this process that I needed, how much I really needed to deal with my pain. And it's okay to bring and be in it to help and really help other people pain and help them work through their stuff. Or let them just talk through theirs. So whatever that looks like. But
Yeah.
I also, and I think I've said this before, but had a lot of guilt of thinking that I knew what I thought they needed to, like assuming their feelings, never really letting them talk through, that it was always about something else, that never letting the process be. So I'm just like, okay, so if I just fix this one thing, which is I'm going to move a chair over here, that'll fix everything. So.
Oh, I feel you, Danielle.
He even adds, I'm looking at this one quote that I put asterisks around, but this is simply not a matter of accurately observing what a child is doing and correctly guessing what he might be thinking. It involves momentarily letting go of one's need to manage, control, or even teach. The capacity to appropriately let go of my needs and worries to simply be with the moment and become more reliable. So again, just letting go of all of those things that have been ingrained in us to do, and just momentarily be able to just be, not do.
I love it. That's it, right, Danielle? Who knew you could bring pain to work? That was not how I was raised as a professional. Let me tell you that. I was raised to suck it up, leave it at the door, smile, and look good. Wear a suit, look professional, talk like you know what you're doing, never let them see you sweat. And I'm like, wow. The irony of that blows my mind now. We were asking people to show us their pain, take risks, and talking to us about stuff that worries they didn't have enough for their children, or couldn't raise them, or couldn't provide for them, or they're be vulnerable with us while we be stiff professionals with you. Wow. I can't believe that went on for so long nowadays. Now I look back on that and be like, what? What were we thinking? What?
Or even the irony of us wanting and trying to build relationships with the families that we work with and wanting them to be vulnerable with us, but we didn't allow it within each other. Like, it was this weird, we were asking people to do something we really didn't know what that was ourselves.
Doesn't that feel like the definition of like blind? Oh my. Yeah. I know we're running out of time, but I wonder about sort of the last part of this. I loved that little bit about a consumer's guide to reflective supervision at the end. He identified those, I guess he had 4 things that he considers critical qualities. And the presence, the commitment, the reverence, and the mutuality. And the part that, I don't know, of all of those, I certainly agree with all of those, but the part that feels passionate to me, I don't know, the part that really stirs me up and gets me feeling strong is that reverence. I love how he describes it. He says he looks for a supervisor who has a profound respect for the intra and interpersonal processes fundamental to this work. I just love that profound respect for. And I feel like that's what I've landed with. It's like an awe or something of the power of this process.
I also like how he talks about in the presence, like reflection is a deeply personal process. And that's what we said at the very beginning of this conversation. It's personal, it's individualized, and again, as he mentioned, at the very core of who I am and its effect on my work. It really is, and how important that work is.
Yeah. Mm. Any of those stir you up, Danielle?
No, the mutuality, but I also, go back to the reverence, and I will occasionally become stuck. The growth will be in fits and starts. Because I think also it is a process, and it's something that you always have to work on. And it's not just because you take a class, you read an article, it's like, okay, I'm here, let's go. It's something that you're always going to have to, and to be, I think, very self-aware of where you are and when you see it in yourself, to be able to be effective, I think, as a supervisor, or effective supervisor, knowing that it's going to happen like that.
Yeah. I wish there was a time when we arrived and we were done cooking. The only time I ever feel like I've arrived is when my Google Navigator says, "You have arrived." Other than that, Danielle, I fear you're right. We are on this road for the long haul. Oh my goodness.